My father was a man who believed that silence was a form of strength. He worked at a printing press back in Ohio, and I remember watching him come home when I was a boy. He would walk up the porch steps and I could hear the heaviness in his boots. He never complained about being tired. He just sat in his chair, staring out the window, quietly letting his energy drain away year after year. I used to think that was just what getting older looked like. I thought it was a natural fading of the light, a battery slowly running out of charge until one day it just could not hold a spark anymore. For a long time, I accepted that same fate for myself. When I hit my late 60s, I started feeling that same heaviness in my own legs. I would wake up after a full 8 hours of sleep and still feel like I had not rested at all. My mental clarity would get cloudy around 2 in the afternoon, and I found myself sitting in my own armchair, staring out the window just like he did. The body warns before it collects. Most people realize too late what it was warning them about for years. I am telling you this because I wish someone had told me earlier. Envelhecer well begins with what you stop ignoring. I thought my fatigue was just a permanent condition of my birth certificate. I assumed that the engine inside me was simply wearing down and there was absolutely nothing to be done about it, except to try and manage the decline. But then Eleanor went through a very difficult health period. I have mentioned before that I do not talk about her specific diagnoses out of respect for her privacy. But I will tell you that watching the woman I love lose her vitality frightened me in a way I had never experienced. That fear did something useful. It sent me to my study. I started reading. I started taking notes with a pencil in my notebooks, trying to understand what was actually happening inside us as the calendar turned. What I found forced me to rethink everything I believed about aging, energy, and what we are actually capable of fixing. I kept coming across papers talking about something called mitochondrial density. I am not a doctor, and I spent my career in publishing, not in a laboratory, so I had to translate the clinical language into something that made sense to me. The way I understand it now is that our cells have these tiny power plants inside them. Every single thing we do, from walking to the kitchen, to remembering a name, to healing a scratch, requires these little power plants to generate energy. When we are young, our cells are packed with thousands of them, running beautifully. But as I read further, I learned what happens as we cross into our 60s and 70s. These power plants start breaking down. Some shut off completely. Others start running terribly, spitting out waste products instead of clean energy. I read a number that I could not get out of my head for days. By the time we reach our age, we have lost 30 to 40% of our cellular power capacity. Suddenly, my afternoon exhaustion made perfect sense. I was operating a massive factory on half the electricity. For a long time, the medical consensus was that you were born with a certain number of these power plants, and once they died off, they were gone forever. You just had to live with the dimming lights. But as I sat in my leather chair, tracing my finger over a medical journal article from the early 2000s, I read about a process I had never heard of before. I learned a term called mitochondrial biogenesis. That is a heavy phrase, but what it means is incredibly simple and entirely profound. It means your body can build brand new power plants from scratch, right now, inside your existing cells. You do not have to just repair the old, rusty machines. You can actually install brand new ones. I sat there in the quiet of my house, looking at pictures of my 3 grandchildren on the shelf, and I realized I had been resigning myself to a weakness that was not entirely mandatory. Some damage happens silently until one day it just does not happen anymore. You do not need fear. You need attention. I needed to understand how this rebuilding process actually worked before I could believe it. I have never been one to just swallow a promise without seeing the mechanics underneath it. From what I pieced together in my reading, there are 3 main switches in the body that turn on this factory construction. The first is something researchers call a master regulator. I think of it like a construction foreman. When this foreman gets the right signal, it goes straight to your DNA and orders the building of new energy centers. The second switch fascinated me even more. It is an energy sensor in the cells. When the cell feels a tiny bit of healthy stress, this sensor rings an alarm bell that says we need more power, and it triggers the construction of more engines to handle the load. The third piece of the puzzle is a specific molecule that we lose dramatically as we age. I read that by the time we are 50, we have about half of this molecule compared to what we had at 20. The lack of this molecule is why our power plants suffocate. Before I tell you exactly what I started doing to flip these switches, I want to ask you a quick favor. I get messages from people who tell me they have been watching my videos for weeks, and they suddenly realize they were never actually subscribed to the channel. Could you take a moment right now and check if you are subscribed? It does not cost anything, and it truly helps this channel reach other folks our age who are trying to navigate these years with dignity and clear information. When I realized that I could actually build new energy centers in my cells, my next question was how? How do I signal the foreman? How do I ring that alarm bell? How do I replenish that missing molecule? I assumed the answer was going to be some complicated pharmaceutical intervention. But as I read through a landmark study from a university up in Canada, I was stunned. They took a group of adults around 65 years old who were fatigued, sedentary, and losing muscle strength. They did not give them a new drug. They gave them concentrated extracts from specific foods. After 12 weeks, they actually took tiny samples of their muscle tissue and looked at them under an electron microscope. They actually counted the power plants. The folks who got the specific food compounds grew 39% more power plants in their cells. They walked further. They absorbed oxygen better. They literally rebuilt their cellular engines. That was the day I changed how I eat. I did not do it to lose weight, and I did not do it because my daughter Rebecca, who is a nutritionist, told me to, though she certainly encouraged it. I did it because I wanted my power back. The first change I made was blueberries. I read that the dark blue pigment in these berries activates both the construction foreman and the energy sensor in our cells. I found a paper from a university in England where they gave people my age just 1 cup of blueberries every day for 6 weeks. They measured almost a 30% increase in cellular power capacity. So now every single morning, without fail, I have a cup of blueberries. I do not cook them because I learned that high heat destroys the very compounds I am trying to eat. I just eat them plain or with a little yogurt. I buy them frozen when they are out of season, which works just as well. It is a quiet morning ritual that I now know is actively building my endurance. The second thing I changed required a bit more effort. I was reading about how the walls of these tiny power plants are made of fats, and if you do not have the right fats, the walls get stiff and the engine runs terribly. The research pointed directly to the heavy fats found in cold water fish. I read a study from Brazil looking at older adults who ate salmon 3 times a week for 3 months. Their muscle enzyme activity went up over 30%. Their leg strength improved dramatically. I told Eleanor about this and we made a decision. 3 times a week we have salmon, mackerel, or sardines. I know some folks do not like the taste of fish. If that is the case, I have read that the specific omega fats you need can be found in certain algae supplements. I also learned that trying to get these specific fats just from flax seeds is incredibly inefficient for the body to convert, so I stick to the fish. The third change surprised me the most, and honestly it is the one I enjoy the most. I found out that cocoa, specifically the very dark bitter kind, contains a compound that is one of the most powerful triggers for building new cellular engines ever discovered. I sat in my study reading a paper out of San Diego where they gave an extract of this cocoa compound to patients with severe heart weakness. Over 3 months, the volume of power plants in their muscles increased by over 40%. The blood flow improved. The oxygen delivery improved. So I went to the store and bought chocolate. But I had to learn the hard way that the sweet milk chocolate I used to enjoy does absolutely nothing for my cells. It has to be dark. At least 70% cacao, though I have worked my way up to 85%. I eat about 2 small squares every afternoon. It is bitter at first, but your palate adjusts. I always check the label to make sure it does not say processed with alkali, because I learned that processed strips away all the beneficial compounds I am trying to get. The fourth food I brought into my daily routine was something my mother always tried to get my father to eat, but he usually refused: spinach and leafy greens. I never understood why they were so important until I read about how our bodies use the natural nitrates in these leaves. When we chew them, Our body converts those nitrates into a gas that opens up our blood vessels and tells our cells to become more efficient with their oxygen. I found a study from Sweden showing that after just 3 days of consuming these concentrated greens, the proteins responsible for building new energy centers were already increasing. I aim for a couple of cups of fresh spinach or arugula every day. But here is an error I used to make. I used to use a strong antibacterial mouthwash right after lunch. I read later that the bacteria on our tongues are the exact things that do the converting of the nitrates. By using that harsh mouthwash, I was destroying the very process I was trying to create. Now I leave my mouth alone after eating greens. I also stop boiling my spinach because the water pulls all the good compounds out. I eat it raw or just lightly steamed. The fifth addition to my daily routine sits right in my refrigerator: walnuts. I used to keep nuts in the pantry, but I learned that the healthy fats in them go rancid at room temperature, and when they smell like old paint, they are actually inflammatory. So I keep them cold. I read an analysis showing walnuts have double the antioxidant power of any other nut, but more importantly, they contain a very specific compound that our gut turns into a signal. This signal tells the body to sweep away the old, dead power plants and make room for the new ones. It is like a cellular cleaning service. Another study I found tracked older adults eating just a small handful of walnuts a day for 6 months, and they showed measurable improvements not just in their cellular markers, but in their memory tasks. I eat exactly 1 ounce a day, raw. I never buy the ones roasted in heavy oils and covered in salt, because that just introduces the inflammation I am trying so hard to avoid. The sixth change was difficult for me because I loved my afternoon coffee. But I kept reading about the compounds in brewed green tea. I am not talking about the sweetened stuff in plastic bottles from the gas station. I mean real tea leaves steeped in hot water. The active compound in green tea directly rings that alarm bell in the cell I mentioned earlier, the one that triggers new energy production. I read a study out of Taiwan where older adults with metabolic issues drank 3 cups of green tea a day for 8 weeks. The sheer amount of cellular DNA they grew was staggering. So I made the switch. But I had to learn how to brew it properly. If you use boiling water, you burn the leaves and destroy the compounds. I heat the water until it is steaming but not bubbling, and I let it steep for about 4 minutes. I read that adding a little lemon juice actually helps your body absorb the compounds much better, but adding dairy milk completely blocks it. So I drink it plain, with just a squeeze of lemon 3 times a day. The final piece of this puzzle was something I had rarely eaten in my life: pomegranates. I discovered that the red seeds in this fruit contain a remarkable substance that performs a very specific job. You see, building new power plants is only half the battle. You also have to get rid of the broken ones that are smoking and polluting your cells. I read a fascinating trial from Switzerland where they gave older folks a compound derived from pomegranates. Over 4 months, their endurance improved significantly. The researchers noted that their cells were functioning like someone 10 years younger, purely because the pomegranate compound was acting like a garbage truck, clearing out the cellular debris. Eating a fresh pomegranate is a lot of work, so I found a practical compromise. I drink 4 ounces of pure, tart pomegranate juice every day. I make absolutely sure the label says 100% pomegranate, with no cheap apple or grape juice mixed in to make it sweet. Now, as I started incorporating these 7 things into my life, the blueberries, the salmon, the dark chocolate, the spinach, the walnuts, the green tea, and the pomegranate juice, I realized something else from my reading. You cannot just drop these foods into a broken routine and expect a miracle. I learned that timing matters immensely. Our cells operate on a clock. I found out that if I take a brisk walk in the morning, even just for 30 minutes, it primes my cells. It creates that mild, healthy stress. Then, if I eat these foods within a few hours of that walk, the effect is magnified dramatically. It is like opening the door before you try to walk through it. I also had to change when I stopped eating. I used to snack late into the evening while watching television with Eleanor. But I read that our cellular power plants do all their repair work while we sleep. If my digestive system is working all night trying to process a late meal, the repair crew never gets to do its job. So now, I stop eating at least 3 hours before I go to bed. I keep all my meals within an 8 to 10 hour window during the day. This alone made a profound difference in how I woke up feeling. And I had to look closely at what I was drinking my water from. I used to buy cases of plastic water bottles, but the literature is very clear that the microscopic plastics and chemicals that leach out of those bottles directly damage our cellular power plants. They are toxins that suffocate the engines. I threw all the plastic out. I drink filtered water from a glass now. It seems like a small detail, but at our age we cannot afford to intentionally consume things that break down our energy. I want to be very clear about my own experience with this. When I started this routine, I did not wake up on the fourth day feeling like a young man. This is not an aspirin that masks a symptom in 20 minutes. This is cellular architecture. You are rebuilding the infrastructure of your body, and construction takes time. For the first 2 weeks, I felt exactly the same. I almost told Daniel, my son, that I thought it was all nonsense. But he is an engineer, and he always reminds me that foundations have to be poured before the house goes up. He told me to stick with the blueprint. By week 4, I noticed that I was not looking for my armchair at 2 in the afternoon anymore. By week 12, I realized I was walking up the driveway to get the mail without feeling the heaviness in my legs that I had accepted as normal for years. The chronic aches in my knees, which I now know were partly due to the inflammatory waste from broken cells, had quieted down. I am not telling you to stop listening to your doctor. I am not telling you to throw away your prescriptions. I am telling you that what we put into our bodies dictates what our bodies are capable of building. The medical literature I read proved it to me without a shadow of a doubt. Men and women in their 60s and 70s were growing 30 to 40% more cellular engines just by changing the chemical signals they sent to their bodies through food. They were not genetically gifted, they were just consistent. That is the part most people fail at. They eat a cup of blueberries for a week, get bored, and stop. You have to treat this like a quiet daily job. You are the custodian of your own biology. When I look back at my father, sitting on that porch in Ohio, accepting his fatigue as the unavoidable cost of a long life, I feel a deep ache in my chest. He did not know what I know now. He did not know that his body was begging for the materials to rebuild itself. He just thought the battery was empty. I refuse to make that same assumption. I have 3 grandchildren who need a grandfather who can actually walk with them, listen to them, and be present without being exhausted by the effort of just staying awake. The decline of our energy is not entirely a fixed trajectory. We have far more agency in this process than we have been led to believe. You can choose to provide your cells with the precise materials they need to build new power, or you can choose to let the old engines burn out. I made my choice sitting in my study, surrounded by notebooks, realizing that I still had a lot of living left to do. If any of this made sense to you, if you found something here that you can use in your own life, I hope you will consider it carefully. You have the ability to change how your body generates energy, starting with your very next meal. Thank you for spending this time with me today.